Welcome to TechFluence, the podcast where technology meets influence. In this phase, we journey through the meeting point of science, culture, and purpose driven leadership, uncovering the stories of those whose vision and values are shaping the strategies that will guide the leader of the future.
We are your host, Veenu Kapoor, and
Sudipta Gupta.
and today we are honored to be joined by a visionary leader whose journey spans scientific excellence, cultural depth, and sustainable innovation, Dr. Anjan Ray. Welcome to TechFluencer.
Thank you. Appreciate you inviting me.
Dr. Ray, let's begin with the big picture question. Your journey is truly inspiring, spanning science, sustainability, learning, and culture. We would love to hear more about you, what experience you have shaped your path, and what continue to drive your passion for creating impact.
That's a big, helicopter 30,000-foot question. We are all a sum of all our experiences, right from childhood, every little thing. My earliest memories are in my village. My father was in the Navy. He would travel. He would come back with stories. We'd be in a joint family with the 33 first cousins. If one of us got lost, nobody would notice, that sort of thing, right? We lived, it was a village in Bengal, not far from Calcutta. We were, I don't know, about 3 minutes walk away from the Ganges River, from the Hooghly. We had a big pond in the back of our house and lots of trees to climb. And we lived amidst nature. Typical, I would say, well-to-do village house. A pakka house, well respected. My uncle, who was the patriarch at the time, he was a professor, teaching at a local school. And education was always respected in Bengal. I think my first influence was there, that everybody there valued learning and everybody there respected nature. So whatever we see today, whether it is about science or about sustainability or even about culture, probably came out of those roots, which never left me. And wherever I traveled, India is a rich place. My father was a Fauji, so we moved around a bit. India is culturally so rich that as long as you wanted to, you could. And in our childhood, we were growing up in the 60s and 70s, there were no distractions of today's kind, no digital distractions. So we were always outdoors. I think that was main. As one went into college, again, I think a family belief was that kids should be allowed to go out, whether boys or girls, go out, live in hostels, experience other people. And that shaped me a lot. Living in a hostel in IIT with a lot of people who were brighter than me. In school, you think you're smart. And then you land in college, everybody else is smarter. That's a big adjustment. It's also a good humility building exercise. Nowadays, what happens, I think it has morphed into something where people are so competitive that they're finding it very hard to take small failures. That's where you see so much stress, so much suicides, and this huge weight of expectations that are loaded on young people today. I don't think we had that.
You have drawn inspiration from many sources. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So sources can be of all sorts, right? Inspiration can come from people. It can come from situations. It can come from places. It can come even from just reading or seeing things.
True.
Right? I can think of a few very significant people and moments. My father, he was a Second World War veteran, was a superb storyteller, wonderful hunter, warm and generous human being, and very considered in a lot of his views. So one of the things I learned from him was that one should always keep one's options open. He would tell me the story of how when he was studying to be a doctor, and he had a lot of dreams of being a specialist, etc. Then first, Second World War happened, then his father died, and then partition happened, they had to move. So under all those circumstances, he never changed his belief that he had the capability, but that he should do what is available rather than keep pining for something that might not be there. So he would always say, keep your sights far, but your eyes close. I would like that.
Sights far and eyes closed.
Huh? So I used to like that sort of thinking. Another inspiration that I had, he was a friend in my childhood. He would have heard it from his parents. His name was Arvind Kakkar, and I have no idea of where he is. But we used to walk together from the school bus to home, and we were in class one. And he had this phrase that he had picked up from somewhere. So he'd be mostly quiet. So once I asked him, "How come you're so quiet?" He would say, "Jasti kaam kamti baat." So another, my PhD guide, he was a Nobel Prize winner. He won the Nobel Prize a few years after I completed my PhD. And first of all, he used to say science is people. He had this great belief that you can't make things happen if people are not inspired to make things happen. He also had this thing that it is the narrowness of the human mind that would divide knowledge into subjects. So he used to really encourage you to embrace everything, whether it was anthropology or whether it was sports or music. In fact, he would encourage you to go do something else after you finished your PhD, not what you had studied. A true visionary. And maybe it is from him that I realized that science, arts, commerce, these are artificial labels. I've actually managed to do all three in my life and never felt that one was at the exclusion of the other.
True, that's like you have built in the things from everyone you have met in your life. This reflects.
Yes, again, I can pick an example in commerce. Again, two of my icons. One was I would say my first super boss when I joined industry. So I came out of a PhD in the US, started to work in the chemical industry in India. And one day, one of my best assistants quit. And I was 27 years old. I was distraught. I went over to my boss and said, he has quit. What do I do? He looked at me very matter of factly. He said, suppose he was run over by a lorry, he'd just do the same thing, no? And I really paused. I mean, it was I first thought it was rude, but then realized the truth. And then he added a line I never forgot. He said, the graveyards of companies are filled with indispensable people. That changed my entire attitude to how one worked with colleagues and juniors. That you not only ensure no one is behaving as if they're indispensable, you always build backups. You build the next line of defense, you coach, you train, you empower. That line changed my way of thinking. Similarly, she was an Australian lady, my first international boss. And she used to be, leading a personal care cosmetics ingredients business across Asia Pacific for a multinational. And in her spare time, she ran a ballet school, and she was a grandmother of three grandchildren at that age. And she could do all of those together. So the whole ability of multitasking, she explained to me that you have to have preferably written down, but possibly, if not at least in your mind, great clarity on what is urgent has to be done now, and what is important has to be done well. And why you must do important things before they become urgent, because if something that is to be done well has to be done now, it will probably be done badly.
Point. How do we keep this inspirations all live when you face with challenges or some setbacks that you must have faced throughout your journey? So how do you keep them alive?
This is a good thing to introspect upon, right? Challenges will always be there. Setbacks will come. I think, again, one of my early learnings was that make sure that your personal setbacks do not reflect in your professional behavior, because nobody gives you special discounts for that. So I remember I was still not yet 30, I was still single, and I had quite a severe attack of something called Bell's palsy, where half your face shuts down. So your face actually gets distorted. You have difficulty breathing on one side. When you lie down, you can't sleep because you're not able to breathe properly. It's quite challenging. And there are two ways to look at it. My life is over, ho gaya, right? Or, okay, what are the known resources? So I had a very good doctor. He told me, see, it usually goes away. Guarantee to nahi hai. Take these, but take time off. So I went to my boss and said, can I take some time off? He said, sure. The company has a guest house by the seaside. You just go there, spend as long as it takes, come back when you feel better. So I just sat on the seaside every day. I would come out uh, under the palm trees, watching the waves. There was a caretaker who fed me, and the moment I started to feel mentally better, I was busy. I didn't have to work in office, but I was busy, and I had some time to introspect. So I was writing, I was engaging in music, I was walking around and meeting other people there. And nobody commented on the fact that my face was distorted, right? So my self consciousness went down. What I realized was that the problem was not with other people looking at me, problem was with me looking at myself.
Yeah,
And
actually,
right?
consciously we know inside.
Right.
Right.
So I think that was a really big learning. And I'm eternally grateful to my bosses then for giving me time off when I was distressed. And it gave me a very powerful tool to deal with myself and my setbacks. So I learned to take downtime and use the downtime to revive. And over the many years that I've had to do that, the downtimes have been short, a day, 2 days, like that. Never needed such a long downtime again.
Great learning for us also.
You said you're taking inspiration from your lady boss, who was an efficient multitasker across domain. Give us some example from your life, what you have learned.
Learning is a big word, but yes, what I've tried to do, not only from her, but from others, I could see that if you had a lot of interests, then you had to make some choices. And I evolved this belief that if you do what you're interested in, you will normally be good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I was interested in a lot of things. I loved music. So I formally trained a little bit in Hindustani classical music when in school, learned to play the guitar in college, would be visiting the Philadelphia Orchestra when I lived in the US and learned a lot about classical music history in the West. So music was one thing. I also enjoyed journalism. I worked as a broadcaster for many years with All India Radio. Also did print journalism with a magazine which is now defunct. It was called the Illustrated Weekly of India. Did some reporting, live on-ground reporting during the Bombay riots in the early 90s. And then I taught journalism. So each of these was a different facet of me. I began to realize, I think, quite early that I had to pick a priority. So I picked science as a priority, not because it was the thing I liked best, but because it was the hardest thing to do as a hobby. Most of the other things you could do as a hobby. Science you couldn't do as a hobby, you had to do it as a career, pretty much, right? So that's what shaped me.
Interesting.
And
And then you chose, like, hobbies are different and you chose science as your career.
Right. So whether it was, writing a book or working in a film, I could do all those part-time. But if I wanted to do science, I had to have a job in science. I couldn't do science as a weekend thing.
True.
So that was the first.
So tell us about your journey as a science to corporate management in multinational company, from there to government role.
It was a pretty interesting journey. In fact, I would say the journeys are never over, right? Zindagi mein, in life, you have to keep walking, keep moving. In Sanskrit, there is a shloka called Charaiveti, Chalashyamaha Nirantaram. Keep moving, move forever. Yeah, move without stopping. So when I started, I think with all of us, when we start in a career in industrial chemistry in this case, I was very lucky because I trained as a surface scientist. I realized that everything is a surface. Even agrochemicals sprayed on a leaf of a plant is something hitting a surface. And after a while, I realized from the science engineering background that I had, that if you became a surface scientist, you could go to almost any application, any kind of job. And I think that really shaped my career. So as one got better and better at surface science and started to experiment with different things, so batteries, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, paints, agrochemicals, one day my boss in my first company came to me and said, Anjan, from today's Friday, from Monday, we are moving you to the dark side, as you used to call it. You will take charge of marketing. I was distraught. I was like, what do you mean I will go to? That's the job only, right? So he's like, "Achha, think about it. You can continue where you want. We know you might answer this way, but maybe in a year, maybe in 3 years, some young MBA 5 years younger than you will be your boss. Do you really want that?" So it was a compelling argument. So I went over to management, to a marketing role, from marketing to a national sales and marketing role, from there to a business role. And then eventually I changed jobs because another company sent a headhunter after me to take care of running one of their business groups. So at that point, when I interviewed for my second company, I told them, "Can I keep some R&D with me?" And they said, "Sure. That business has an R&D group, and the R&D person is very senior. He's retiring, so you can run the R&D. Paisa bachega. You'll save some money. You can run the R&D yourself while you run the group." So I did that for a few years, but slowly I moved into pure play management roles over time. And that's how I eventually came into Honeywell, which is where I had the privilege of meeting Madam Sudipta. And in Honeywell, I ended up doing mostly management roles. Quite satisfyingly, for 10 years, you could see how a big company works. I was given the opportunity to travel to many countries, I think 30 plus countries during my stint in Honeywell, looking at all sorts of interesting portfolio tasks. But after my 10-year anniversary, Honeywell has a nice little ceremony. They give you a certificate. I started to think, who am I really? And I felt that I'd moved very far away from science, which gives me my greatest joy. There are three things we all work for. We work for status, we work for our financial goals, and we work for intellectual satisfaction. And at this point, I really was never particularly hung up on status. My financial goals were reasonably well met. I felt I wasn't getting enough intellectual satisfaction. And just around this time, the Indian government started to hire a lot of laterals into senior roles. So I saw one of those, was encouraged by somebody to apply, got it, and I just moved. Interesting. So those 6 years in the government were really eye-opening. I discovered how much the government can do if it wants, and how much freedom there actually is in the government. I had never thought I would say this when I joined, but the best team I had in my 30-odd years of working was in my government stint at the Indian Institute of Petroleum in Dehradun. Incredibly committed people. And it is a bit like if you go to a doctor in a government hospital, you will find they're the best skilled because they have no money motives. In a private hospital, there's always some financial target. Yes. So going from a corporate to the government was refreshing in terms of the empowerment and the freedom to make an impact that one had. We did some nice things out there. We managed to fly a plane on fuel made from trees, oil seeds harvested by tribals in Chhattisgarh. We turned it into a fuel and flew a spice jet plane from Dehradun to Delhi. That was a great experience. And during COVID, we built 108 oxygen plants and deployed them across the country to remote areas and then ran them from our laptops. So things that felt very good. We collected plastic from all over Dehradun and turned it into diesel on which we ran the institute buses. It was not only empowering, it was amazingly liberating, because in a corporate environment, you have to work for the company's objectives, which will always be driven by its own products, its own processes, and its own profits. But when you work for a government role, especially one where you are allowed to do science and technology for the greater good, there's nobody restraining you. You're limited by your imagination and your capability. That was a truly fine experience. Good to know.
So you can give wings to your thoughts, that's his speech. Like, otherwise, corporates are all restricted environments.
Yes, it works both ways, right? I mean, it's not that corporates don't empower, but I would tell, today if somebody asked me, if I had to go back and look at myself, would I do something differently? I'd say probably not. It is good to go to something like a government job later in life. You go too early. What I did see is that in a lot of places, you are encouraged to take a government job because of job security. But then the passion to deliver doesn't come. if that's your mindset,
That you learn from the
from my corporate experience,
Yeah.
that you must deliver,
Exactly.
right? When you take that into a setting where you're able to deliver, that combination is magic. But maybe from day one, if I had come there, it may not have been so effective.
Tapidi, in your private and government roles, which industry sectors did you touch upon, and how are the perspectives different?
The sector where I touched most upon on both sides was energy, because the institute where I was with the government was the CSIR, Indian Ministry of Petroleum. But just because it's petroleum doesn't mean we did only petroleum. We were looking at a core issue for India, that we are very big importers of oil and gas and coal. And one of our early studies after I took charge, was to show that India actually throws away more carbon atoms than it imports. So if as a country we knew how to repurpose all our waste, we would not only never have to import energy again, we could stand up and tell the world we don't need your crude oil. What do you think that would do to crude prices? They'd collapse, right? So that was one. The second half of it was India's commitments to climate change. So in my earlier jobs, I had also worked in sustainable products. So both in energy and environment, I had the privilege with the government of representing India in the climate negotiations of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2022. And there I began to understand how complex this is. That as a country, we want our people to be protected from climate shifts. We want our agriculture to be protected. But we also want to use our coal because that's our primary resource. If we don't use our coal, how do we manage? But if you burn coal, then we are impacting global climate. How do we tread that fine line? A lot of these points improve my perspective on the government side. In the private side, I was always focusing on what is it that we want to sell? What is it that we want to offer? Where do we want to make money? I was not seeing it from a perspective of a nation or the planet first. I think that was the one shift. The other area that I looked, I had a very brief engagement with this, but it was a very big learning engagement, was about corporate governance and ethics. Under a Supreme Court mandate, I had temporary charge at the time of the Central Building Research Institute. And there was a real estate builder who had violated laws in Noida, which is a suburb of Delhi. And he had continued to build these two illegal towers that, were 100 feet tall, higher than the Qutub Minar, two towers. And the Supreme Court ordered that they be demolished and put my institute in charge of the demolition. So I had to stand there and get it demolished. It was a very difficult demolition because, first of all, there were buildings nearby. The next building was 27 feet away. And there was a gas pipeline underneath, which couldn't be shut off because it was generating power for that entire area. It was going to a gas power station. So that's when I could see science and engineering in action to solve a real problem. It was one of the most challenging assignments of my career, but a fascinating one. So this learning that between the private sector and the government sector, you need both. The private sector creates wealth, it creates jobs. It also, because it creates profits, it focuses on building in capital. Every time somebody invests, puts steel in the ground or builds a data center, you're not only creating thousands of jobs, you're also creating a value chain. You want vendors to come in, you want service providers to come in. All of these are interlinked. And yet, if you are going to run a fleet of cars to ferry your people back and forth from a call center, they've got a carbon emission. So maybe you need cars that are running sustainably. I began to appreciate much more these interlinkages when I came to the government role.
This is interesting to know that you were also pioneer in getting that building demolition in Noida, which was a much talked about thing when it was happening. So if you can say a little more about it, because
Sure, it was in the month of August, exactly 3 years ago. It was 28th of August. And the Supreme Court, this case had gone on for a long time. The builder had actually built these in the green space when the floor area ratio had been expanded in Noida. So the people who had bought in the nearby towers and they were expecting a green space suddenly saw towers coming up in front of the balconies, right? And they went to court. And the builder basically presumed that he could keep on building and the courts would rule in his favor under some technicality. It was in Allahabad High Court, and there are some wonderful stories of these on the net.
Yeah.
The what was called the ICORWA, the Eco RWA, they took up cudgels as a group. And the case eventually went to the Supreme Court, who said, no, the demolition must proceed. But to proceed safely, the CSIR Central Building Research Institute must be in charge. They must certify that this can be done properly, and they must ensure that it is done properly. Now, CBRI had never demolished a building, but they knew a lot of science. And in CSIR, there was also another entity based in Dhanbad. In fact, very close to the infamous Gangs of Wasipur movie location in the coal mining belt, which was an expert in explosives. Central Institute for Mining and Fuel Research. So I happened to be in temporary charge of Central Building Research Institute when this order was passed. So basically the job was mine. And the Noida authority, under whose nose this building had come up, was responsible for ensuring that all support was given for the demolition. The builder had to pay for everything, including taking away the debris after the demolition. So they got the best demolition team from South Africa. They got a very strong demolition and estate management team from somewhere else in India. And then they put us in charge of reviewing the demolition plan and making sure that we can certify it is safe for the residents and for the nearby areas. Now, that's not easy because nobody had done it. There was no blueprint. There was no playbook. So we had to actually rely only on calculations. When we did the calculations, we realized there were uncertainties. So even though the Supreme Court had given a deadline, we requested a 1 week delay. And on the 21st of August, 1 week before the actual date, we did a test blast. We blasted part of the thing just to see if the blast patterns and what we were predicting mathematically were aligned. And based on that, we made some corrections before we did the final blast. There is some hilariously interesting things, right? Because the next building was so close by, we actually got cargo containers, and put them between the two buildings. And then we put truck tires on top of those so that if something happened, if there was a shock wave, the truck tires would bounce and the cargo containers would take the shock. It wouldn't pass through the building. And when the actual demolition happened, those who've seen it, it was a near perfect vertical fall. It happened in 9.5 seconds. And nothing was damaged except the external boundary wall of one of the neighboring complexes. So we had about a 3% margin of error. We were off by about 1.5%, and only that much damage happened. We also removed, with the help of local NGOs and with local people, we removed all the stray dogs, cats, relocated birds' nests. We tried to make sure nobody was hurt. Another CSIR lab developed a jet spray, that was then used to spray that huge dust cloud that was created. And then it took weeks, I think months, to take 80,000 tons of debris away.
50,000 tons of debris.
Yeah.
And then we just read that things that it's getting demolished, there would be like huge smoke, dust smoke and all. But then so much of work behind it is just not known. So thank you for this information to us. Yeah, it's a very fascinating story. Like it's just giving me goosebumps because too many things you have told about it now. So what insights did you derive about governance, technology, human behavior? What are the correlation on that?
Yeah, I was telling you earlier that everything is interlinked, but I like the 3 specific points you picked here. I think what I learned was that justice does get served. Yeah, the judiciary, even though it was the apex judiciary, justice was served. Technology will find solutions if a precise problem is given. The ability to articulate a problem well is something we are not good at as Indians, but every time a problem comes out clearly, people solve it. So there are millions of things happening around the country which we call jugaad, but these are actually problem solving, and we should not look down on jugaad. There is, in fact, something called the National Innovation Foundation. Every year, they collect all the grassroots innovation around the country, and they present it in the grounds of Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the Honorable President of India then reviews it. Because they want to see if what happened in one village, maybe in remote Kerala, can be redeployed in another village in Uttar Pradesh, right? So the last thing that it tells us, this entire episode of the demolition of those twin towers, is that there are human behaviors that are good universally by universal yardsticks, and that are not okay also by universal yardsticks. But I can tell you, when the buildings were demolished, so many people cheered that you could see that this whole sort of triumph of what is right over what is wrong was universally accepted. It saddens me, I think, that human behavior doesn't always reflect the reality. Very recently, there was a India Today cover story called Gross Domestic Behavior, about how a lot of people in India have this chalta hai attitude to laws and regulations. But ultimately, it's not laws and regulations that determine who you are. It's how you behave, right?
So, Dr. Ray, imagine the world your children and the grandchildren will live by 2050. What do you most hope they will celebrate, and what do you most fear they might regret?
You know, nobody lives in isolation. The question that you ask is a matter of deep and extended thinking. I think the biggest fear that I have today is the level of strife and polarization in the world. Everybody is busy othering us and them. There is actually a brilliant play by Woody Allen about this years ago. Or maybe it was Woody Allen. Maybe it is, can't remember anyway, somebody, called Us and Them. And it talks about what happens when you build walls, when you point fingers and say, wo log and hum log. You know? That is my biggest concern. And I think that I would want my children and grandchildren to grow up believing that the same blood flows in everyone's veins. We are all controlled by the same DNA. That that class distinctions and community distinctions and country distinctions are artificial. Birds don't know boundaries, right? They fly between countries. They don't need passports. So, and my greatest hope is that we will wake up to this, to the concept of polarization, and also wake up to the fact that we are not the only species inhabiting the planet, and that our behavior has already killed off many species. So we must learn to be more inclusive, not only as a society, but as a species. Make sure that there is room for all other species to live.
So, in your view, what skill will be most important for the next generation to thrive?
I think 3 skills will drive everything. When we were younger, the coveted jobs were doctor, engineer, lawyer, right?
Yeah.
I think now the most coveted job, yes. Today, the biggest skill that will be there is adaptability. How quickly can you switch from one thing to another? So instead of learning one thing, the ability to keep learning different things, the most important skill. The second, you have to be digitally literate. I'm not talking about AI, but you have to have digital literacy because the world is going digital. And the third is that you have to be socially relevant. You will not be able to operate only on the skills that you have between you and your computer or you and your phone. You will have to reskill yourself on how to deal with different people. I think those are the core skills for the next generation.
So, how about the values?
That's a much bigger question, right? I think it's harder to talk about values in isolation of culture, because every culture has its own values. Yeah. But probably just the value of the respect and responsiveness. So if you want to gain respect, you have to give respect. If you want somebody to respond to you, you have to respond to them. Yeah. And most people, when you go to the market, when you're standing in a queue, wherever you go, what are the only 2 things? Response and respect. You don't mind something being overpriced if you're getting these, right? So maybe I would say that the core values are learning to respond well and learning to respect.
That's a good thing to know.
If you could pass just one guiding principle to the next gen, what would you like to do?
I think I would suggest that they imbibe the twin principles of Ismail Serageldin, not a terribly famous person, but one of the greatest thinkers of the second half of the 20th century. He was the librarian in the historic library of Alexandria in Egypt. And he wrote down these two rules, the input rule and the output rule. Very simply, the input rule says, don't take more from the planet than she can give you. The output rule says, don't dump more on the planet than she can absorb. So just look at us. We are buying things that we don't need. When we buy something that we don't need because it's on sale or because we feel we can afford it, we are making machines run for us. If I buy just a extra shirt, I am actually starting from the time that the cotton had to be farmed, to the time that the truck had to run to the showroom, to my own journey to that showroom, or the courier that delivers it to me. I have caused machines to run and a carbon footprint to happen and an environmental impact from the packaging materials that have been thrown and discarded. If I'm just a little more conscious on what I consume, most of what I wear is, I can write down the date. Some of the things I wear are from the 1990s. My wife laughs at me, because she says, what about the economy? I say, you take care of economy, I'll take care of ecology.
So interesting. What are the few moments which have always stayed with you, which you would like to carry always? And
Which I would like to carry. Some I think one carries without wanting to. For example, I actually was waitlist number 7 on a flight going from Aurangabad to Bombay on 26th April 1993.
on a flight.
On a flight, I was waitlist number 7. Up to waitlist number 6 got on the plane. The plane crashed on takeoff. 56 people died, and I was pulling up dead bodies thinking it could have been me. Now, that's something I remember. And when the recent Air India accident happened, I was thinking of what role chance plays in one's life. Right? So I think that one has really stayed with me. Another one, I think, purely coincidental. I was traveling on work from Ahmedabad to Delhi, Ahmedabad to Bombay on a Shatabdi Express on a train. And next to me sat an old classmate who I had not seen for some 25 years. And then we ended up collaborating on a lot of things just from that chance meeting. So I think the moments that one remembers, including the pleasurable family moments, the time I met my spouse, when the first time I held my daughter, the first time I met my to-be son-in-law, many family moments, the points where there were deaths of loved ones in the family, those stay with you, but those are part of life. It's those moments of chance that I think really, really shape some of your introspection as well as some of who you end up becoming.
As a scientist, do you believe in God?
So, many years ago, I went to a lecture by a Nobel laureate called William Fowler. He was a Nobel Prize winning astrophysicist who had studied the Big Bang theory and was working on predicting the age of the universe. And somebody from the audience asked him almost the exact same question, said, Professor Fowler, you're a devout Christian and an astrophysicist. How do you reconcile these seemingly different things? And Professor Fowler looked at him with, I would say, a mixture of surprise and pity. He said, sir, everything you consider divine or supernatural or paranormal is just beyond the boundaries of science as we know it. Now, I told you about my PhD guide. He was also a Nobel Prize winner. And we had this theological discussion after Professor Fowler's lecture. He and I had both attended. And he said to me, Anjan, maybe there's something out there. As a scientist, it is our job to believe what we prove. How can we disbelieve what we can't disprove? So based on the thought, I actually spent 7 years researching the supernatural phenomena, going to haunted places, going to graveyards, meeting tantrics, across the world, in a lot of different places around the world. And then I wrote a book on this, book of short stories in 2005 called Just Beyond, drawing from William Fowler's line. And to my pleasant surprise, the book actually was a bestseller. So I was quite taken aback that it did so well.
So you have done everything throughout, right? Like from believing in God, going to tantrics, to the science, to the petroleum institute. So means you've got everything in your one kitty. So, but then one which makes very memorable to you? You have given too many things.
I think I've been very blessed. So I don't know what very memorable as an incident, but one thing that I did that probably shaped a lot of who I was in my late adult life is that for various reasons, I once decided to go alone and live in a forest, walking through the forest solo, eating fruits from trees, bathing in the river for 15 days. And I did that along the Narmada from Amarkantak to Mandla, 200 kilometers in 1999 when my daughter was 4 years old. My wife was very annoyed because that's prime tiger territory. There were no mobile phones. She was like, "What if a tiger eats you?" And I gave her my insurance file. She got even more angry. But I did this trip.
That's too interesting. Dr. B, your last adventure, like correct adventure, I think, is your veggie captains. So if you can throw some light on it.
No, this is, it's wildly exciting. I work with this venture capital firm called Navam Capital. And we fund startups in the deep tech area, which means knowledge-driven, science-based entrepreneurs who are trying to bring the future into the present. And that's space science, robotics, nanotechnology, biotechnology, semiconductors. It's lovely to see people with so much idea and such an enabling ecosystem emerging to help them in India. All I say is that whatever we are seeing out there is a very good sign for India's innovation future.
Thank you, Dr. Ray, for sharing your insight and experiences with us. It was really too good to know so many things in one evening. Your work, it's a beacon for those seeking to blend tradition and with innovation and science with purpose. Thank you so much for joining us. We are superly honored.
Thank you both. The privilege was mine.
To our listeners, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep bridging gap with Techfluence. Thank you so much.